mynews.studio.
Picture this. It's sunrise in Rio. A mother checks her bank app and suddenly sees a payment that changes everything for her family. They're no longer below the poverty line. What's driving this kind of transformation?
Today's date is October 18th, 2025. Let's start with the main point. Poverty rates in Latin America and Indonesia are at their lowest levels ever. In Latin America, the rate is projected to drop to 25%. Indonesia's is now just 9%, the lowest ever recorded for both regions.
That's a major shift. If you go back just 15 years, multidimensional poverty in Latin America, including not just income, but education and housing, was close to 46%. Now it's around 25%. Brazil really stands out in this story, doesn't it?
It does. Brazil's progress is tied to a mix of expanded social security, pension reforms, and economic growth. The Bolsa Familia program is key here. Over 20 million households are getting support. Just last year, in 2023, about 8.7 million people in Brazil moved above the poverty line. Extreme poverty dropped from 5.9% to 4.4%, the lowest level since 2012.
And Bolsa Familia isn't only about giving out cash. There are conditions attached. Families have to keep their kids in school and make sure they're vaccinated. So the program fights poverty now and aims to prevent it in the next generation. But why did this centralized, data-driven model work so well in Brazil, while other Latin American countries had to take a more regional approach?
It comes down to how much administrative capacity and political structure a country has. Brazil could run and expand Bolsa Familia on a national scale. Other countries had to adjust their strategies for local realities.
Like how poverty looks different in urban areas compared to rural ones, or how pension changes play out depending on the region.
Exactly. For some places, local needs made a one-size-fits-all program impossible. Urban and rural communities face different challenges, and pension reforms can have very different effects depending on the context.
On pensions, Brazil's changes included raising the minimum retirement age and standardizing benefits across sectors. That's helped the budget and reduced inequality, but there are still people who slip through the cracks. Is that a concern for the whole region?
Absolutely. Vulnerable groups, like informal workers or people living in remote areas, can still be left out if programs aren't designed carefully. Indonesia's experience is instructive here. They focused on rural poverty and building infrastructure, which helped push their poverty rate to a record low.
Indonesia's approach stands out. They invested in rural development, infrastructure, and targeted social assistance. But is it realistic for other countries to just copy these policies?
It's not that simple. Adapting these policies depends on a country's political will, available budget, and how well its government can execute programs. For example, if a country is politically unstable or has limited funds, it's much harder to run something like Bolsa Familia. And local context, things like demographics or even geography, matters a lot.
Let's touch on how we measure poverty. The Multidimensional Poverty Index doesn't just look at income. It covers health, education, and housing too. How has that changed the way governments act?
It's made policies more focused. Instead of just boosting incomes, governments now look at where people lack essentials like food, clean water, or access to schools. For instance, in Brazil, social policies now include food security and nutrition, since those gaps were identified as priorities.
Still, there are warning signs. Urban poverty is rising in Latin America, even as rural poverty drops. Bolivia, for example, still has high poverty rates, though things are improving. What could put all this progress at risk?
Several things. Economic shocks, changes in population, and fast urban growth are big risks. If there's a recession, or if cities can't keep up with new arrivals, progress could reverse. It's crucial to keep investing in social programs and adapt policies as needed, and political changes can always threaten funding.
So the main takeaway is, poverty isn't a fixed problem. With smart policy and targeted investment, real progress is possible. But to keep that momentum, countries need to stay flexible as things change.
And to share what works, while understanding that each country faces its own challenges. Brazil and Indonesia show what's possible, but their paths are unique.
That brings us back to where we began. Every statistic hides a real family whose life has changed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into poverty reduction and its impact worldwide.
If you found this discussion helpful, consider sharing it. Thanks for listening. This episode was brought to you by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.